The pages are out of order on here, so if I skip around some, don't worry about it. A Mountain Calling by Amy Leanbach Marquise, National Parks. John Muir never liked the word hike. Even in the 19th century, American society's connection to nature had grown increasingly shallow. People's time outdoors rigid and hasty. Muir, on the other hand, preferred to saunter. Sauntering meant taking your time, valuing what you see, says Tad Shea, lead interpretive ranger at John Muir National Historic Site in Martinez, California. It meant stopping to enjoy the view of a lake, not running past it. Born in 1838 in the seaside town of Dunbar, Scotland, Muir began his love affair with nature at a young age. In 1849, Muir's father sacrificed the family's wealth in Dunbar for a harsh farming life in America, claiming an 80-acre plot of land in central Wisconsin. It was in this pastoral wilderness, its open skies, frozen meadows, and thousands of migrating birds, that Muir found his own religion. Muir was nearly 30 the first time he ventured into California's Sierra Nevada mountains. He was overwhelmed by the landscape, scrambling down steep cliff faces to get a closer look at the waterfalls, whooping and howling at the vistas, jumping tirelessly from flower to flower. We are now in the mountains and they are in us, kindling enthusiasm, making every nerve quiver, filling every pore and cell of us, he wrote. Muir quickly found work as a sheep herder to keep his precious place near. Guiding his flock through the foothills and into higher elevations, he began his lifelong courtship with the Sierra Nevada. He spent much of his 30s alone in the mountains, carrying a tattered blue journal that he filled with sketches, scientific observations, and soulful writing. Although he preferred living on society's fringe, he also longed for human companionship. Muir began publishing his writing in 19th century travel publications that East Coast tourists read on trains bound for the West. Soon, famous scientists and writers joined him in the Sierra Nevada. Ralph Waldo Emerson affected Muir deeply. So did President Teddy Roosevelt, whom Muir invited on a camping trip in the Sequoia Forest with one stipulation: no politics allowed. Roosevelt went on to establish Yosemite as a national park. We like to say that Muir got the ball rolling for the national park system, Shea says. 4 more significant designations would follow thanks to Muir's influence: Grand Canyon, Mount Rainier, Petrified Forest, and Sequoia. America would come to know Muir as the father of our national parks. In his 76 years, Muir published more than 300 articles and 12 books. He moved a president to create the U.S. Forest Service and co-founded the Sierra Club, which helped establish several new national parks years after his death, and now boasts 1.3 million members. It's quite a legacy for a man who was so adamant about taking his time. Our lives are so rapid these days, Shea says. Perhaps the best way to honor Muir is simply to slow down and appreciate nature for its beauty. Pause right here and write a genre-based thinking job for this passage. Now it's time to read the second passage. Albert Palmer was a companion of John Muir on several memorable saunterings through the Sierras. His memoir is a treasure of the early conservation movement in America. From The Mountain Trail and Its Message by Albert W. Palmer, 1911. There is a 4th lesson of the trail. It is one which John Muir taught me during an early Sierra Club outing. There are always some people in the mountains who are known as hikers. They rush all over the trail at high speed and take great delight in being the first to reach camp, and in covering the greatest numbers of miles in the least possible time. They measure the trail in terms of speed and distance. One day, as I was resting in the shade, Mr. Muir overtook me on the trail and began to chat in that friendly way in which he delights to talk with everyone he meets. I said to him, "Mr. Muir, someone told me you do not approve of the word hike. Is that so?" His blue eyes flashed, and with his Scotch accent he replied, "I don't like either the word or the thing. People ought to saunter in the mountains, not hike." Do you know the origin of the word saunter? It's a beautiful word. Away back in the Middle Ages, people used to go on pilgrimages to the Holy Land. And when people in the villages through which they passed asked where they were going, they would reply, "A la Santerre," to the Holy Land. And so they became known as Santerreirs, or saunterers. Now these mountains are our Holy Land, and we ought to saunter through them reverently, not hike through them. John Muir lived up to his doctrine. He was usually the last man to reach camp. He never hurried. He stopped to get acquainted with individual trees along the way. He would hail people passing by and make them get down on hands and knees if necessary to see the beauty of some little bed of almost microscopic flowers. Usually he appeared at camp with some new flowers in his hat and a little piece of fur bow in his buttonhole. Now, whether the derivation of saunter more gave me is scientific or fanciful, is there not in it another parable? There are people who hike through life. They measure life in terms of money and amusement. They rush along the trail of life feverishly, seeking to make a dollar or gratify an appetite. How much better to saunter along this trail of life, to measure it in its terms of beauty and love and friendship. How much finer to take time to know and understand the men and women along the way, to stop a while and let the beauty of the sunset possess the soul, to listen to what the trees are saying and the songs of the birds, and to gather the fragrant little flowers that bloom along the trail of life for those who have eyes to see. You can't do these things if you rush through life in a big red automobile at high speed. You can't know these things if you hike along the trail in a speed competition. These are the peculiar rewards of the man who has learned the secret of the saunterer. Pause right here and write your genre-based thinking job for this passage. Number 1. What is the central idea of a mountain calling? A. John Muir was an adult when he visited the Sierra Nevada mountains. B. John Muir was especially affected by his childhood in Scotland. C. John Muir played an important role in protecting America's wilderness. D. John Muir admired the work of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Number 2. With which claim would the author of A Mountain Calling agree? A. Private nature parks should be turned over to the U.S. Forestry Service. B. Rushing to see as much of a natural park as possible is sometimes necessary. C. America finally has enough national parks to satisfy everyone's needs. D. Every American should try to visit a national park at least once in his or her life. Number 3. Which detail from A Mountain Calling disagrees with the claim that Muir preferred to saunter? A. Sauntering meant taking your time, valuing what you see, says Tad Shea, lead interpretive ranger at John Muir National Historic Site in Martinez, California. B. He was scrambling down steep cliff faces to get a closer look at the waterfalls, whooping and howling at the vistas, jumping tirelessly from flower to flower. C. He spent much of his 30s alone in the mountains, carrying a tattered blue journal that he filled with sketches, scientific observations, and soulful writing. D. He moved a president to create the U.S. Forest Service and co-founded the Sierra Club, which helped establish several new national parks years after his death. Number 4. What is the meaning of the word pastoral as it is used in this sentence from A Mountain Calling? It was in this pastoral wilderness, its open skies, frozen meadows, and thousands of migrating birds that Muir found his own religion. A. Friendly. B. Savage. C. Vanishing. D. Empty. Number 5. In the mountain trail and its message, what does the word hail relate to? He would hail people passing by and make them get down on hands and knees if necessary to see the beauty of some little bed of almost microscopic flowers. A. A threat. B. A greeting. C. A storm. D. A suggestion. Number 6. The following question has 2 parts. First answer part A, then answer part B. Part A. What information about John Muir does the reader learn in The Mountain Trail and its Message that is not in A Mountain Calling? A. He was a well-liked man who would rather have been around animals. B. He was an influential man who prided himself on his accomplishments. C. He was a friendly but isolated man who wanted others to share his life. D, he was a kind but lonely man who found his joy in writing about nature. Part B. Select one sentence from the mountain trail and its message that supports the answer in Part A. A. Hikers rush over the trail at high speed and take great delight in being the first to reach camp and in covering the greatest number of miles in the least possible time. B. One day as I was resting in the shade, Mr. Muir overtook me on the trail and began to chat in that friendly way in which he delights to talk with everyone he meets. C. There is a fourth lesson of the trail. It is one which John Muir taught me during an early Sierra Club outing. D. How much better to saunter along this trail of life, to measure it in terms of beauty and love and friendship. Number 7. Which idea from A Mountain Calling is supported by the passage from the mountain trail and its message? A. Born in 1838 in the seaside town of Dunbar, Scotland, Muir began his love affair with nature at a young age. B. Muir quickly found work as a sheep herder to keep this precious place near. C. Perhaps the best way to honor Muir is simply to slow down and appreciate nature for its beauty. D. 4 more significant designations would follow thanks to Muir's influence. That is the end. This was a really tough passage. You have time if you want to go back and listen to certain questions or parts of the passage again. Raise your hand if you need help from me or Miss Graham.